And thank you everyone for coming along tonight. I'm Rory Waterman, a member of the English and Creative Writing academic staff at Nottingham Trent University, and I'm the convener of Nottingham Creative Writing Hub at NTU, and this is a Nottingham Creative Writing Hub event. Nottingham Creative Writing Hub is the central place for creative writing at Nottingham Trent University, hosted by the Department of English, Philosophy and Communications. NTU is home to dynamic and long-established undergraduate and postgraduate courses in creative writing at BA, MA and PhD, with an exciting, thriving, diverse community of writers. If you go to our website, and I will put a link in the chat in a minute, you'll find links to all of our courses, member profiles, a blog, and information about forthcoming events, among other things. And we have 2 more events coming up soon, and you'll find information about those there. So a little bit of housekeeping before I pass over to the event chair. Those of you in the audience will be able to see and hear the readers throughout the evening, of course, but audience members, you can't be seen, you can't be heard yourselves. All of you in the audience are, however, invited to ask questions and to make comments throughout the event. There's a chat function for comments, and you'll see that at the bottom of the screen, and you can put comments in there. And there's also a Q&A button that you should see down at the bottom of the screen, Q&A, and that's where you want to go to submit questions. And you can submit those questions at any point throughout the evening, and they will then be picked up by Sarah, and she will do her best to get through them. Those questions could be directed at any of tonight's readers. And now I'll get out the way, and I'll pass to my colleague and friend Sarah Jackson, who is chairing tonight's event with 2 current NTU creative writing students, Josh Short and Victoria Zoë Callus, and also Lynda Clark, who's a star NTU creative writing graduate who last year launched her debut novel to great acclaim. So Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Rory. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us for this evening's event, which, as Rory's just said, features writers Josh Short, Victoria Callus and Lynda Clark. It's such a pleasure to welcome these 3 writers this evening, because I think that in many ways they represent the thriving nature of the creative writing community at Nottingham Trent, from undergraduate to postgraduate researcher and beyond, bringing together diverse forms that are original, innovative and critically and conceptually engaged. These 3 writers show us the different kinds of conversations taking place between readers, writers, students, colleagues and friends. So this evening, I'm going to introduce each writer in turn and then invite them to read. We'll then come together at the end to have a conversation and to answer any questions that you might have. So please do remember to post any questions that you have in the Q&A at the bottom, and we'll pick them up after the readings. So firstly, I'm delighted to welcome Josh Short, who is currently in his 2nd year of an undergraduate degree in creative writing at NTU. Josh is currently exploring free verse and white space in his poems, and we're really delighted to welcome him this evening for his debut performance. Josh, over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm Josh. My poem Oranges is a free verse poem trying to, it's inspired by the style of Frank O'Hara and his lunch poems. So here it is. Oranges. I leave the office, there are some unable to, and walk past the Green King chef with grease on his chest, the Chinese place peeling potatoes for the deep fat fryer, the Turkish migrants kneading dough in the pizza kitchen's cramped back room. And I am wondering when, if ever, I will come back to the country. Nothing appeases me to red house grey tiles, designated greenery. Nothing releases me from town hall tower skies, institutional scenery. I enter the sandwich shop. There are 4 of us, then 2, and order a roast beef sandwich, mustard spilling out because I want to eat. He nods, smelling of tobacco and peeled oranges in a sunny glass. And I stroll back, squeezing the paper, thinking of potatoes in honesty boxes damp from soil, dreaming of saffron cakes spread with jam, freshly baked. And I unwrap my sandwich on a gold plaque bench, wondering at the pigeons who could always leave but never do.
Thank you so much, Josh, for sharing that poem with us. We have an exciting talent in our midst, for sure. We'll come back and ask Josh some more questions about the poem, but I'd like to move now to our second reader, Victoria Callus. Victoria is in her second year of an AHRC M4C funded PhD in creative and critical writing at NTU. Her writing is influenced, she says, by her multilingual upbringing in Malta, as well as her previous studies and work in graphic design, film, and creative media. Her current research project explores multimodal forms of literary production, and in particular, the relationship between the text and its different possible textures and surfaces. Entitled Paper Cuts, her PhD project focuses in particular on embodied engagement with the paper medium in contemporary experimental literature. And this evening, Victoria is going to be sharing some new writing that forms part of her thesis. Thank you, Victoria, and over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sarah. So I'm just going to start reading. This is going to be towards the start of my thesis, I think. So it's called Seeking Earth. There used to be the clanking of cutlery, the percussion of pots and pans, the sizzling of food, the shouting heralding life across the hall, barking dog feral with excitement, the rattle of high notes from the radio, the singing of water glasses, a lunchtime joke, after the look me in the eyes or 7 years chin-chin of a supper-time drink. Above all, there was laughter loud enough to rattle windows. Now, 4 walls drain into hall with open door. Between walls, me with beating heart, audible, clock with ticking hands, and then blinking whiz of chest freezer rumbling into cooling mode. Coffee machine cracks espresso into my cranium, buzzing, buzzing, buzzing. The kitchen reverberates and whizzes, tiresome heave of appliances that wish they had expired with their masters. Every 5 minutes, air freshener spritzes and wheezes, trying to milk scent out of an empty can. From a bedroom box, Nanu's Casio awakens, beeping the midday news, but TV doesn't switch itself on. Wiring circulates electricity round walls, an incessant spark of connections. Through walls, spectral steps of neighbors climbing the stairs, closing doors, shifting weight onto chairs that squeak and creak, slapping slippers, sandals, shoes along marble. One would think they were trapped forever, clambering aimlessly. Drip of their tap. Then a tinkering and flush of the toilet. Plumbing grumbles and groans, then releases with a splash on the pavement. Fresh Sunday morning. Bougainvillea strolls solitary across the street like tumbleweeds susurrating through breeze. Balcony door swings and stops, swings and stops. A family of flies takes heed from the distant rising clouds and drone towards rustling bin bags above them. Streaming through towering telephone lines, the quack of quick voices, cooling of wire filament in lamppost bulbs vibrating towards the sky, ducks clapping wings in unison as they fly in V formation, the thundering of a plane out of sight, frost cracking across its windows. Condensation curling and curdling into clouds, the taut drum of a weather balloon reaching up towards heat, its radio transmitter cracking, camera clicking, meteorite flashes past into the mesosphere, hissing and sizzling as it burns out. Aurora flickers into sight. Debris bounces silently off satellites. Then, gently, the beeps and voices, tapping of buttons inside the ISS, and an astronaut reaches for his guitar, still perfectly in tune, though hard to hold. Beyond the window, a stillness carrying into the vast cosmic void, broken only by breath. A loud gurgling snore, and I awake in the kitchen, blink twice, feel the hair on my arms rise. A turbulent landing. Plane hurtles towards runway, shudders and shakes, brief moment of smoothness when it hops over an air pocket, defies gravity, then hits concrete. All pulled forward, seatbelts pressing against tummies, and then stop. Atmosphere pierced by clapping, drunken shouting. We made it, we're safe. I landed on the darkest night of the year, as the last visible star was engulfed by cloud. And when I landed, there was the chanting of matriarchs in a circle, hands raised, hands clapping, hands dancing towards me. Each picked me up, raised me to the sky and lowered me back into the next woman's arms until the circle was complete and I'd reached the elder of the commune. Cressida stood tall, feet planted on either side of my mother's head, thick grey hair swaying across her hips in a steel wire plait. Juno has smiled upon us with a beautiful girl star fallen to Gaia to carry us through the solstice, she said, lowering me back down to my mother. Here is your Vega. The women cheered, we made it, we're safe, the future is female, praise Juno. Mother lay breathless, her eyes locked onto mine, thinking it was finally time to flee the commune and take the 4,969-mile leap home. Her options were limited. She had lost the chance to return to university when she chose dropping acid with her best friend at a women's only retreat over attending the spring resit of her Masters of Modernism exam. On the third day, she rose, abruptly awoken by the beaming moonlight and an overbearing smell of dying embers, to the squelching, wrenching wrangling of her stomach. It hadn't been more than an hour since the grounds had quietened, but here she was, squirming out of her sleeping bag, squirming across the muddy campsite, trying to make it to the nearby forest, when her stomach gave a final churn and emptied onto a tent. She attempted to straighten, to listen out for the sound of another, anyone at all, but the grounds were still. Everyone had passed out in the fumes of the smoke, passed out from too much booze or too many drugs. She was calmed slightly by the knowledge that she hadn't caused anyone to wake, but then it happened again. This time louder and more projectile, and it seemed now that the tent had shaken under the weight of her spew, was in fact still swaying, or perhaps this was her, dizzied. Slowly, however, there came the smooth unzipping of the tent flap, and she was no longer the only one awake. Met first by the smell of weed, and with this another flip of the gut, then by a graceful manicured hand, and following it, attached to it even, one of the retreat's most cherished patrons, Cressida Woodthorpe-Jones. Long and elegant, looking as though she had just slid out of a Mucha painting. Gibson girl hair, velvet kimono, fine slanted brows. Mariella stumbled, face now peppercorn hot, raised hands to cheeks, hammered eyes into soil. Gosh, she said, I am so sorry. I was trying to get to the woods, but I didn't. Cressida grabbed Mariella's shoulder, shook her head in a knowing way, and spoke, voice smooth. Breathe with me. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, tell me, who are you? Oh, I'm Mariella. She trailed off again, unsure of what to say. Cressida's calm was a comfortable one, the kind that comes from never having felt the need to rush to be heard, the kind that isn't concerned with taking up space or time, the kind that doesn't come with meditation, but that is simply gained from ease of life. She reminded her of her own mother. I'll get something to clean your tent, Mariella said. I'm feeling better now. Cressida smiled slowly, took her hand and began to walk. Your accent has a cadence I can't quite place. I like it. It sounds grounded. We'll call you Gaia. Again, Mariella was uncertain of how to react, but carried on walking with Cressida, who continued. Now, Gaia, what has happened to your chi? I feel disruption, intrusion. Oh no, the smell of embers woke me, I think. I tried to run to the woods, but never mind, Cressida said. We need to be cleansed. They had arrived now to a sheltered marquee by a small lake. Cressida pulled a white dress out of a rattan basket and helped Gaia change into it. Then they walked into the water. Let go, Cressida said, and began counting breaths again. Box breathing, she called it. Tonight we float, tomorrow we purge. So they hovered for a while like orchid petals on the surface of the lake. And that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for that really beautiful reading. I'm dying to ask questions, but now I'm going to move on to the final reader for this evening, Lynda Clark. Lynda completed an AHRC M3C-funded PhD in creative and critical writing at NTU in 2019. Her creative critical thesis focused on the relationship between audiences and creators of literature and video games. Her debut novel, Beyond Kidding, was published by Fairlight Books in October 2019 and optioned by Film 4 in June of last year. Her debut short story collection, Dreaming in Quantum, is out with Fairlight in May, which is extremely exciting. Many of the stories it contains were written during her PhD, including Gilly's Mum, which won the Commonwealth Europe and Canada Prize in 2018 and was also shortlisted for the BBC Short Story Prize in 2019 and the ALCS Tom Gallen Award in 2020. It's absolutely wonderful to welcome Lynda back to NTU this evening, albeit virtually. Lynda, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. For those who don't know me, I've got a vocal disorder, so I apologise if my voice gives out, but it does generally get better once I keep going. It's because I've been quiet for a bit now. It's misbehaving a bit, but it will hopefully sort itself out as I go on. So I'm going to read a couple of really short ones. The first one is Dead Men Don't Count. It don't count as stealing if they're dead, Crom tells you for the millionth time, like he's trying to convince himself he ain't a thief. He hangs back, even though the dead man's penned in. You've already done your part, dragging over an old oak cabinet, a heavy farmhouse table, and a low cupboard filled with pots and pans to keep the dead man from interfering with Crom's work. The man's a few years dead. Little more than a skeleton, clad in strips of foul-smelling, discoloured flesh. He bumps against the cabinet, rattling the blue and white china inside. Little of his eyes remain, and yet you feel he's looking at you with a deep sadness, judging you, your reactions, your life choices, as if there was any choice about it. Crom gives the makeshift holding pen a wide berth. It makes no difference to the dead man. It continues bumping against the cabinet, will do so until he rots away entirely, or one of the registry comes and finishes him off. Once he's safely past, Crom pokes out his tongue and waggles it at the dead man, as if he's outwitted him somehow. You hate Crom sometimes. His easy acceptance of everything the home and the registry tell him. Sure, he's young, but still old enough to have a mind of his own. He notices you giving him a look and says, everyone knows if they bite you, you get it. You roll your eyes. They only bite when people are mean to them, which is all the time. You've never seen one of them attack unprovoked. Never, ever. When the registry shot Mama, she was just going to stroke your hair. You knew it because it's what she always used to do, and that's what the dead do. They get stuck in loops and repeat the actions they carried out when they were alive over and over, like a bit of them remembers somehow. Mama was going to stroke your hair, not claw your face like the registry man said. You'd be the expert, Crom mutters under his breath, and you want to knock the smart words out of his mouth, but he's got work to do. In the far corner of the room, there's a safe. It's big and old, the kind that needs careful, precise movements, like mending a pocket watch. You can't just explode these with dynamite like the new ones. They're sturdy and fragile at the same time. Some kind of moron Dada called it, but you can't remember the proper word. You think of Dada's big, strong hands, the hands that made your breakfast every morning and packed your satchel for school. Even after the bad times, even after there was no school and his hands were just bones. Dangerous, the registry man said. Mama and Dada were no danger to no one, least of all men with guns. Crom has set down his bag of tools and is carefully laying them out. You leave him to it. If he's so keen to rob this old man, let him do it alone. You wander back to the man's pen and idly poke through the drawers in the bottom half of the cabinet. Mostly it's been picked clean already. There's just a couple of books and a dusty old box of photos. You drag the photos out and thumb through them, trying to find one of the dead man when he was alive. What are you doing? Crom calls to you. He's on his knees in front of the safe, turning the dial with his ear close to it, trying to determine the contact area. Stop shuffling paper around. I need to hear this. You doubt it's the photos affecting his concentration. It's the dead man. Crom is terrified of them. He saw some film when he was a toddler, too young to understand it was make-believe. Some made-up thing about dead men who just wanted to eat people's brains. So he has it in his head now that that's how they actually are. His parents were took away as soon as they got ill, so he never saw what they were like after. He just has all these pictures in his head of them being like the movie dead men. Zombies, he calls them. Silly name for a silly idea. Even the home don't let you call them that, though they don't like you calling them people neither. Your flicking fingers land on a photo. The man's wearing the same coat he has on now. It ain't all rotten and dusty, but it's definitely the same, with wide silky lapels and brass buttons. His eyes were blue when he had them, and he looks friendly in a sad sort of way, same as now, really. There are more pictures. Him playing with a little girl, him holding a fluffy dog on his knee, him fiddling with some machine back when there was electricity. You realise suddenly that the only sound is the click, click, click of Crom spinning the dial to part the wheels. The dead man has stopped bumping and he's watching you. Well, not watching because you don't have eyes, but regarding you in that way they have. It makes you smile and you ache for Mama and Dada. They was good parents even after. Even the registry lady was surprised. Expected a feral child, she said, not to find you all washed and brushed and well fed. She said it like maybe, just maybe, the registry man shouldn't have shot them, even though just hinting that's treason. If the registry man wasn't shaking so bad, he might have turned her in after handing you over to their home. You've leaned over the pen and given the box to him without even thinking about it, and he's taken it in his pony hands. He clacks his jaw like he's thanking you, but everyone says that's silly, like thinking dogs have personalities. There's a chair in there with him and he sits down on it and puts the box on his knee and rifles through the photos, holding each one at arm's length for a moment, like he's looking at them. He ain't looking at them, you know, says Crom. You wonder how long you've been watching the dead man, because Crom's all done and he has the tools back in the bag and the bag on his shoulder, and all he's got out of the safe is a little black box. What is it? You ask, nodding to the box. He ain't looking at them because he ain't got eyes or a heart or a mind. You take the box from Crom's unresisting hands and open it up. There's 2 rings inside, both silver, both engraved with the same date, a date just before you were born. They just pretend to be alive so they can trick you, Crom tells you sagely. That's when they goes for your brains. The dead man has stopped on one photo. He's been holding it for the longest time. Eventually, he lets it slip from his skeletal fingers and it drops to the dusty flagstone floor. He slumps forward in his seat like a man defeated. You crane your neck to see the photo while Crom tugs on your sleeve. Leave him for the registry, he complains. We should get back to the home. In a minute, You dismiss him with a wave of your hand. The photo is of the dead man, younger, not much older than you, and with him there's another man with dark nappy curls, and they're clutching hands and gazing into each other's eyes, and they're both wearing dove grey suits and brooches of flowers and happy smiles. You wipe your eyes quickly, and you know Crom's seen, but for once he don't rag you about it, he just swallows and puts the rings in his pocket. They was happy as Mama and Dada, you say, your voice high and childish. I know, says Crom, batting your arm. I know. And then, to finish, another short one. This one's called Sheephood. When Saoirse Murphy's baby was found, it was the talk of the town. Everyone went on about it for weeks. How the poor mite was so lucky to turn up unharmed, pram and all, in the Sheephood. Once the relief was done with, which took less time than you might think, Saoirse herself became the object of their gossip. Had someone really taken the pram while she sat on the bench by the wood's entrance? Or had she just left the baby there and wandered off, hoping a passing crow would take pity on her and whisk it away? She was only eating dry roasted peanuts and reading a celebrity autobiography. Couldn't have been that deeply absorbed, surely. Connor Kelly was nowhere to be seen these days. That much was certain, the two-timing baby-ditching bollocks. Maybe Saoirse just forgot she had a baby now and went home to bake that batch of fairy cakes for Amar's church, like she promised, mistakenly leaving little Sean there on his own, gurgling up at the ash trees, just like Jack was doing now. Only Jack was holding his feet and going red in the face, no doubt filling his nappy again the little shite factory. Saoirse wasn't the brightest. Maybe she forgot and then felt embarrassed and didn't want everyone to know. And so she made up the thing about looking away for a second and looking back to find Sean and the pram gone, taken by some unknown woodland kidnapper. Kira peeked over the edge of her magazine at Jack again. He seemed happier out here, cried all the time at home, screamed his little lungs out. Kira could sympathise on both counts, Jack's screaming and Saoirse's shame. Kira once punched a nun in the tit at school, and she was still that wicked girl who hit his sister Claire 7 years later. And maybe Saoirse would rather be the girl whose baby was kidnapped than the girl who forgot she had a baby and left him in the woods. Although that was what they were saying about her in the village pub now anyway, of course. How else would you explain finding him only a few hours later, a few hundred metres from where she said she'd left him? Kira wanted a tissue and wiped the drool from Jack's chin. Ma reckoned he dribbled all the time because he was teething, but Kira couldn't remember a time he hadn't done it, and the little fucker still didn't have any teeth to show for it. Anyway, these last couple of weeks, Saoirse had started saying wild things about little Sean, no doubt to distract attention from having forgotten him in the woods. Why come out with such mad nonsense otherwise? First, it was that Sean didn't laugh the same. Before he went missing, he'd had a throaty chuckle, and now he had a light, reedy giggle. Or so she said. Kira would be happy if Jack did anything other than grunt and fill his pants. Saoirse should count herself lucky. Next, it was that his eyes were the wrong colour. Although noticing a laugh before noticing eyes just adds fuel to the fire of Saoirse being unobservant enough to leave a pram in a wood. To be fair, Kira could barely remember what colours Jack's eyes were. They were usually scrunched up with screeching or the effort of squeezing out a turd. It was a gradual change, Saoirse had insisted when Kira saw her at the post office yesterday. They started out brown like before, and now they're all blue. Look. She pinched Sean's cheek so his eyes shot open, and they did look blue. You had to give her that. Not that Kira could remember what colour they were before that. He sleeps for hours now, Saoirse said, looking like she could do with some shut eye herself. And he never cries, not even when his nappy's wet. It's creepy. And Saoirse had burst into tears, meaning Kira had to take her to the coffee shop and get her a hot chocolate to calm her nerves. Even though what Kira really needed to do was go to the chemist and get some cream for Jack's cradle cap because he had a head like a baboon's ball bag. At the coffee shop, Saoirse had broken down and said she thought it wasn't Sean at all. Kira wondered if she'd be able to tell the difference if someone swapped Jack. It depended what they switched him out with, she supposed. A bag of flour might draw her attention, what with being significantly quieter. But one of those howler monkeys, she doubted she could pick Jack out of a lineup of those. What do you mean, not Sean? Kira had asked, trying to block out that awful gummy noise Jack made while he sucked on the rubber teat of his bottle. I don't know, he's just not my baby, Sir wailed. Look at him. Can you really tell me that's my Sean? Kira looked him up and down, and she had to admit he looked different. The Sean Murphy Kelly Sheeny was a red, angry little thing, with cradle cap almost as bad as Jack's, a flaky head and thin, patchy hair. He screamed for 16 hours out of 24, and during the few where he was awake, not screaming, he shoved his pudgy fist in his mouth and chomped it like a cream bun. This little charmer had a head full of downy brown fluff, wide unblinking eyes that appraised her just as calmly as she studied him, and a complexion usually only found in little girls on the tins of old-time sweets. Of course it's him, she protested. She wasn't so sure, not really. Just because he showed up in the pram and the clothes didn't necessarily mean it was Sean, did it? It just meant this baby, whoever it was wearing Sean's clothes and sitting in his pram. A breeze stirred the trees by the entrance to the woods. Kira shivered. Daylight was fading. Kira pulled Jack's blanket a little closer under his chin and sipped her rain jacket. She wondered how much longer she should give it. A twig snapped behind her and she turned, although Jesus knows what she expected to see. A she sneaking among the blackthorns, all long thin fingers and gossamer hair. There was just a fat brown bird hopping through the undergrowth with a blackberry in its beak. She turned back, half hopeful, half expectant. The pram was still there, and so was Jack. She settled back down to her magazine. Maybe give it another half hour.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lynda. It was such a treat to hear two stories from the forthcoming collection. So thank you so much to Lynda, to Victoria, and to Josh. Now's the time where we open up for a Q&A for questions from you all. I invite you all to post your questions in the little Q&A chat, or comments if you prefer, and I can read them out. To get things started, I thought I would ask a question. So Victoria and Josh, do you want to turn your cameras on as well? The pieces that you read, all of which I very much enjoyed, were remarkably different in style and in shape. So we had a poem, experimental long-form prose, and two short stories. But there was something that I think seems to unite your writing interests, and that's a concern with experimenting with media and form. And I say this with a little bit of an insight into your work and what you've written previously. So Victoria, your piece seems to move very much between poetry and prose, and I know that you're currently researching experimental techniques on paper. Josh, you've told me that you're interested in how you can use the white space on the page. And Lynda, when you were doing your PhD, you worked very much on interactive fiction and sort of digital text, exploring use of hyperlinks, for example. So I wanted to start by asking if I could ask you to say something about, I guess, the ways in which the mode in which you are writing impacts what you're writing about, impacts your use of both language and form. And Victoria, sorry to land you in it, but as you're working particularly on kind of experiments with paper, I wondered if you could start by telling us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I guess in terms of form and the text itself and the way it kind of interacts with the paper, I think that's one of the main things that I like experimenting with, just seeing how, you know, you don't necessarily need to represent text in blocks on a page. You can shuffle it around to represent, you know, different modes of speech, different modes of thinking, and to just make, I guess, not to just make the reading experience more interesting, but also to make the visual experience more interesting and to do something else. So I think that's one of the main things that I like to play with.
And I mean, I guess to push you on the section that you read out to us, can you tell us how that might appear on the page, or what kind of experiments with paper you might be doing for that kind of extract?
Yeah, sure. So that extract is, I guess it sort of relates to a chapter that I'm currently working on in the critical side of my thesis, which is on folds unfolding. So the books that I'm looking at for this actually folds the pages. So you see the text kind of spread out if you'd like. You can open the book and it just keeps, you know, unfolding like an accordion, or I don't know. So in terms of how the text I read looks on a page, a lot of it hasn't got punctuation, it uses space instead. So there's a space instead of a full stop, for instance. But then I'm also going to be experimenting with kind of having fold out pages, and really just looking into how the narrative itself sort of folds space and time. So there's three different time frames in what I read. And then just thinking about how I can also relate that to the paper and to the physical presence of it.
Okay, thank you. Sounds really exciting. You mentioned there that you're not using punctuation, you're using space on the page to do that work for you. Josh, you said to me earlier that you were also interested in white space on the page and how that works in your poetry. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that and what else you're working on.
So I feel like discovering free verse for me, and it wasn't a recent discovery, of course. I've known about free verse for quite a while, but my poetry in the past has always been quite strict in its meter and form. You know, I wouldn't be too experimental. I was kind of trapping myself in a way in a strict meter and in a strict form. And recently rediscovering, I suppose, free verse or allowing myself to write in free verse really opened up possibilities for me for what I could write. Because there is, discussing the role of white space, there is so much freedom in free verse, you know, as you might imagine. And I think that the freedom of free verse really spoke to me, and I felt more able to tell a winding narrative. Certainly in this poem, it was really important that it be free verse, because it is a winding narrative, and it's a succession of images. You know, it's not, no image is explored completely and fully to the most you possibly could. You know, it is a succession of limited images, limited scopes, and the role of white space there is, it gives it kind of a dreamy quality, like when you want that succession of images, you want that dreamlike quality. You can kind of feel yourself being taken along more, I feel, than you could in a strict metered poem, or at least that was my experience. There might not be true for all, but I think for me, it was important to experiment with free verse in that way, because it reminded me that there is a different method of exploring these ideas and these themes.
And what, maybe not just in the poem you read, but in your other poems, are you also kind of experimenting with the kind of the layout of poems on the page, you know, thinking about the ways in which different stanzas or different lines or even individual words are placed on that white space, or are you still sticking to fairly traditional layouts?
Yeah, it's interesting. So obviously you couldn't see the poem, but the poem itself is, the layout is quite strange looking at first, perhaps. There are 4 parts to the poem effectively. You have 2 parts which are, there are 2 stanzas, and each stanza has a first half which is quite rigid in structure, and a second half which is quite loose, and it goes from right to left to middle and all over the place. And at least in this poem, it was really helpful for me, because when you have a rigid style, if you describe very robust images, it gives a more of a robustness to those images. It strengthens the images, so you're really grounded by that rigidity. Whereas in the second stanza, when I'm discussing or detailing more abstract imagery or the thoughts of the persona in the poem, a looser style helps quite a lot, and it helps really ground you in that kind of cloudy idea.
Wonderful, thank you. I kind of open this up when I want to kind of pose this question to you, Lynda, because what's really striking about your work is the variety of different modes and forms in which you write, from digital fiction to novels to short stories. And actually this ties in with 2 questions, and I didn't want to lump them together, but there are 2 questions that have appeared on the Q&A. one of which is, how did the transition from writing long fiction to short stories happen for you? And the second one is a simple question, I guess, why write books when you could write games? So bearing those two questions in mind, can you tell us a little bit about how you are moving between these different modes, and how you kind of choose what mode that you want to work on?
So first of all, I'd say I didn't really move from long form to short. I've always written in lots of different forms. If anything, like I kind of started more in poetry, but then I kind of fell very out of love with writing poetry. Like I love listening to and hearing poetry, but I just don't feel I can write it anymore. I don't know why. I just don't get on with writing it at all. Whereas short stories gave me like a bit more space to kind of explore ideas. In terms of kind of deciding what it's going to be, it varies. So sometimes it's more often, particularly with the digital stuff, that there's like a tool or something that I want to try out. So I'm working with AI at the minute, and so I've just had a look at various different AI-based tools, saw the different things they could do, and then the story kind of arose out of that, and out of the research alongside that. And it's sometimes similar with stories, but not always. Stories more often is just that several things kind of collect together, and then that becomes an idea for a story. And then I will, as I start to develop it, either think actually this is a longer thing or a short thing, or whatever. But yeah, there's no one answer really to that. And into the question about why write stories when you could write games. So I worked in the games industry for a while. Writers have no power. Like, you write in spreadsheets, that's what you do. The designers design the concept, and they may think of a narrative if it's that kind of studio and that kind of game. They probably won't. They'll probably just think of like characters and things that happen, not really like a full narrative. And then you get the game at the end, and we'll get told to like paste a story onto the existing parts of it, which is fun. It can be really fun to do that, and that is changing now, because I was in the industry sort of 10 years ago. It's kind of changing now that writers are more involved and are more at the core. But when I was in the industry, it was very much you had no real input into the actual narrative. So that's why I do stories rather than games. But I do make my own little small games, because then I can have creative control over the stories and make strange things like bake-off episode generators and things like that.
Sounds really intriguing. Something that's kind of another question that's come up that I think, again, seems to really resonate with all of you is this idea of experimentation. And I'm really struck by the ways in which you all seem committed to trying new things with your writing. Lynda, you were just saying that you find a new tool, you find a new kind of bit of software, a new bit of whatever, and you want to have a go with it. You want to see what emerges from that. And Josh, you've been talking about try discovering Freeverse and wanting to see what it can do with you, and Victoria the same. What can these different techniques offer you? There's a question here about experimentation. Somebody's written, I admire your experimentation. For all of you, sometimes I find when I'm writing so many resonance of other writers, it is not easy to feel I have the permission to experiment, like it's all been done before. Does that happen to you? Are you aware that you're experimenting, or are you writing what you want to write? So this idea of permission to experiment, and kind of this feeling that we sometimes have that everything's been done, and do we have the right to try it for ourselves? Any volunteers to take that question up?
I don't mind talking about it.
Victoria, yeah, that's great.
I mean, in terms of feeling like it's all been done before, it probably has. That's just how things are. Like, everything's been done at this point. Not everything, many things have been done at this point, but that shouldn't really be discouraging, I think. I guess, at least with myself, when I write, I try to ignore all the sort of rules and things that I've learned. So I try not to think about those and just write in whatever way I feel I'm comfortable doing at the time. And yes, sometimes what you're reading does influence what you're writing, but that's I guess, inevitable sort of. I think just as maybe when you're watching a series, the next thing you want to watch is something similar, it's kind of the same thing that affects your mind. But really, if you're just scared or you just think you need permission, or I don't know, you feel like you might be taking away from what someone else has done, that isn't really the case. At least this is what we always learn when we're doing like creative writing degrees and like postgraduate and all that. You're constantly told like you're not actually taking what you're doing is original because it's what you're doing, it's coming out of your own mind. So as long as you're not plagiarizing someone, then something different is going to come out of it, I think. And that's, I guess, a hopeful thought to hold on to.
Yeah, it makes me think of Jacques Derrida, and apologies for bringing this into this event, but the sense that the greatest of works, the greatest masterpieces are those that are most haunted. So that, you know, that anxiety of influence is actually, you know, it's not something we can move away from, but it's something that we should embrace and think about the ways in which our own texts are haunted by those texts that have come before. And there's another question from Joe here about this, I guess. Joe's asked, how do you think your reading, either creative or critical, influences your writing? So Josh, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're reading and how that has impacted your own development as a writer?
Sure, yeah. And I can also bring back to the question on the permission to experiment when I talk about this as well.
Yeah.
So I'm reading a variety of poets, Frank O'Hara, Robert Frost. Not that that's a recent development. I've always been reading Robert Frost, and I seem to reread him constantly. But and a bundle of other authors. But I feel that there is a lot of merit to trying to understand the style of a poet or an author, whatever it might be, in whichever form it might be, and taking not just inspiration, but really almost trying to replicate that style in terms of just a kind of development for yourself. Because, you know, with my poem, it was very explicitly inspired by Frank O'Hara's lunch poems. Very explicitly, you know, if you can read, you can look into it and automatically assume, yes, it's Frank O'Hara. And I don't feel that there's any issue there, because it might not be wholly entirely original, but it's original in content and original in perspective. And through replication, you can really alter your own completely personal style in that way. But it is, for that reason, so important to read widely and to read closely and with a good eye for your own poetry as well.
Thank you. And Lynda, what about you? What are you reading at the moment, and how does that influence your own writing?
I'm actually reading a lot of AI stuff about AI at the moment, unsurprisingly. In terms of fiction, I'm currently reading a lot of science fiction. So I normally I kind of dot around between genres really, and read lots of different genres. But I'm currently having a sci-fi go at the moment. Just kind of to echo really what Josh and Victoria were saying about kind of experimentation, that very often when I kind of set out thinking I'm writing one thing, or that it's influenced by a particular thing, or that I'm exploring a particular thing, and then either afterwards I'll look back on it and go, oh no, actually that was that, or the people reading it will say that it's a totally different genre to what I thought I was doing. So again, it kind of, the originality kind of comes out without, as Victoria was saying, like, you don't even realize that you're doing it. You think you're kind of doing one thing, and it's something entirely different.
Yeah, it reminds me of Richard Hugo in his book on the triggering town, and he talks about how the trigger for a poem, or I guess any piece of writing, might be what starts it off, might be what you think you're writing about, but very often by the time you've got to the end, you've actually written something else entirely. And actually that's part of the beauty, is that actually you're able to let go of it and let it become whatever it wants to be. I've got another really interesting question here, and this one is for Lynda, and I guess we're thinking still in terms of experimentation. Jack asks, is there such thing as a game poem in the same way that film poem has become a recognised term?
Yeah, definitely. So Abigail Parry is someone that you should probably look into if you're interested in that kind of thing. Her work's brilliant. It's there's lots of different ways that she explores that idea of a game poem. So she was poet in residence at the National Video Game Museum when it was in Nottingham, and she just explored loads of different kind of computational ways of writing poems. So there's a really brilliant one that's like a line of poetry, and you kind of scroll through the different words, and it's like a combination lock, and it just gives loads of different permutations of a poem, but you unlock more lines as you kind of find the right line of poetry. But she's done loads of really interesting things, and there's also like quite a lot of generative poetry, so kind of just digital versions of the kind of I can never know how you say it, yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it, but yeah, there's like digital versions of that, basically with it kind of automating the sort of randomized selection of the words, or with a particular pattern to put in the words in. Just today, actually, I was just looking at like generative haikus, where you create the kind of rules of a haiku, and then the system goes away and does it and writes them. So yeah, it's definitely becoming a field. I still don't know whether they actually call it game poem in the same way that there's like film poem, but yeah, it is getting there.
Yeah, it's a lot of electronic poetry, isn't there, that plays with that. A bit of a different question, but I think it's a really interesting one that I want to pick up on, and it's this idea of how has your writing practice been affected by lockdown? I know this is something kind of really pertinent to so many people. Have you struggled to write during lockdown, or have you found that the more confined spaces, the cloistering, has been conducive to writing? This is open to any of you. Any thoughts?
I think I have the time to write, but lacking the inspiration, because I know, you know, this is not a uncommon idea, but the trouble is that without any inspiration, it can be so hard to write. You know, you're not going out and meeting people, you're not gathering ideas from people. You're very much secluded to your own ideas, and in that way I do feel that much of my writing has it's either pure fantasy, or it's examining memories more than observations, which has its own merit, but I do find it more difficult because with observation you can get a constant stream effectively, and I think for me it's a lot easier to write regularly with a regular stream of information. But relying on memory for inspiration is not quite so regular, it's not quite so reliable.
Okay, interesting. What about you, Lynda? Has lockdown been productive?
No. I find that it's not even just it's not even really inspiration. I have ideas, but I don't have any inclination to write whatsoever. Like, it's the first time in my life I think that's happened, because I always want to write, and I'm quite like prolific in doing stuff, but no, because I don't know whether it's just because I spend all day at a screen now, which I did a lot anyway, but it was broken up by commute, and I would have meetings that weren't at my desk and that kind of thing. But now absolutely everything is in front of a screen. And so just the thought of doing it again to write is just, ugh. So I've written a couple of, I've started a couple of stories, but I've started another novel, but it's very slow going with everything. It's kind of dragging it out, which doesn't usually happen. But yeah,
I'm very familiar with that feeling. Victoria, what about you? Has it been productive for you?
It's been different, I guess. So I think I found it easier to write poetry in lockdown than sort of longer things, just because poetry, at least for me, it's usually just like little observations, you know. So especially in England where you're literally like stuck in the house. It was nice to just admire the sunset, for instance, and think about what I'm seeing, like the view from my windows, like the tiny little things that you get so used to seeing every day, but then when you're actually stuck inside with them, they become the only thing that you can, you know, escape with, essentially. But then I guess I was lucky because I spent the summer at home in Malta. Well, okay, it's February now. I spent a long time in Malta, and we didn't have such a heavy lockdown, so that was really helpful. Then when I got back and I got to like meet people and, you know, just observe life, essentially. That just sounds weird, but it's, yeah, I think interaction, like both Lynda and Josh have said, is really, really important when you're trying to write, and without it things sort of fizzle out a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. We've just hit 8 o'clock, and there may be a couple of questions that I haven't managed to get to, but I'm sure our speakers would be very happy to hear from anyone should you wish to kind of continue the conversations. And I guess I want to end with a final question, because I think this is a really unique event, actually, because we have an undergraduate, a current postgraduate researcher, and a graduate of the PhD program in creative and critical writing. So it's really nice to see these kind of different generations of writers in one place. But this question is kind of targeted, I guess, at Victoria and Lynda, because I know that quite a few people are interested in what kind of a creative and critical writing PhD looks like and what it might do for you. Why do one in the first place? Does it help you write, or does it stop you writing? What are the benefits? What are the challenges? So I wanted to end by asking you both to say something about, you know, if you had to offer one piece of advice to somebody who's interested in pursuing further research in creative and critical writing, what that advice might be. Victoria, you're in the midst of it, so this isn't really fair, but do you want to tell us, you know, what you would say to somebody considering the options?
I would definitely say go for it. I found it really challenging at first because I am a bit of a, like, I tend to take things quite literally. So having to deal with both my creative thoughts and my critical thoughts and put them together was quite difficult. But as the PhD progresses, it actually gets more interesting, for me at least, and I find it a lot more enjoyable. And overall, it's a great experience because you get to like dabble in both things if you're interested in both. So if you are interested in pursuing a critical creative or creative critical, definitely. And there's so much support as well at NTU, which I think is quite rare at many universities. So yeah. Thank you.
And Lynda, you've been through the process and come out the other side and done so fabulously well. You know, you're at Dundee, you've got a novel, a short story collection, your novel's been optioned by Film 4, you're winning prizes left, right and centre. So how did you get there, and you know, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about this as a next step?
In terms of getting there, I spent 10 years submitting things getting rejected. So sorry that I know that's always disappointing when people hear that, but also like it's encouraging that you do really have to just keep going and going and going. But I did my PhD towards the end of that kind of 10-year period, and it was just a way of taking stock really and returning to doing my writing and spending time on my writing and to seeing it as something of value and that I wanted to put time into and believed in. And it was really great to have the opportunity to do that. And then just as well, like as Victoria said, it's really difficult to combine the creative and the critical together. And like I did really struggle with that throughout doing the PhD, but now that I'm a researcher at Dundee, I can't imagine not doing the two things together. It's because my research now is creative critical as well, and just I can't imagine ever not doing it. So it was a really useful experience in terms of preparing me for that kind of research role that requires both elements.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to sort of note that, you know, even if you're creative writing creatively, you're thinking critically all the time, and vice versa. So that sort of separation is to many extents kind of an artificial one. But it's really nice to hear you sort of say that for you, Lynda, that the PhD gave you kind of almost permission to write and to take your writing really seriously. And this echoes back to the question we had earlier about kind of permission to experiment. That actually, you know, what's really great about this event for me has been hearing you kind of reiterate that the value in the time, the space, and the permission to kind of explore all your ideas, whether they're creative or critical, through the written word. Thank you so much for joining us, Josh, Victoria, and Lynda. It's been a joy to have you all in one virtual room, and I hope we get the opportunity to speak again very soon. Thank you to our audience also for being here and for your questions and your comments, and thank you to Rory for hosting. I'm going to hand back to Rory now.
Hello. That was wonderful. I really enjoyed that, and a great Q&A. Actually, I've got one cheeky question that was sort of almost covered by the last one, but not quite, because it strikes me that I think this is the first time we've had a hub event where everybody, every reader, is a student or former student of creative writing at NTU. And it's quite hard to ask this as someone who represents NTU on an NTU event and not make it sound like I'm advertising for NTU. I'm not trying to do that, but I am genuinely interested in what it is that drew you to creative writing and in a sort of critical context, as our courses tend to be, and something that you think has benefited you from doing that, you know. Yeah, if you've got anything to say about that, I'd be really interested to hear. You're all at different stages, I suppose. So I'll start with Josh, actually, who I knew as a first year, and now I teach as a second year. You know.
I think for me, I really didn't know at first what I wanted to study. I mean, I knew I was interested in English very much. So it was always going to be something along the lines of English, but why I came to the decision it would be creative writing specifically, I think it's because I realized it's the only thing I was really interested in realistically. I loved English, but I wanted to know how to write better. You know, that was my main goal. You know, I did study English for a year at University of Nottingham before coming to NTU, and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't what I was after. But I mean, also B, it was the only thing I was really any good at for a long time. You know, I couldn't claim to be much good at anything else but that. But I mean, yeah, it's been fantastic there. I mean, the degree is great. This year especially has been really helpful for writing. So yeah, certainly recommend it to anyone.
That's it. I wasn't looking for an advert. I mean, we'll take that. But yeah, I'm really interested in what sort of drew you to do that in the first. Thank you, Josh. Victoria, it seems natural to go in the natural order of things. So, Victoria.
So with myself, I dabbled in quite a few different courses before settling on creative writing. So I used to write quite a bit when I was a teenager, and people used to tell me, you should become a journalist or a writer or whatever. And I think because so many people told me that, I refused to follow that path. And instead I went into like graphic design and creative media just because I like visuals and I enjoy playing with that. And then I guess I decided that I wanted to move to Nottingham because I had been meaning to move, like to live abroad for a while, I guess. And I just came across the course and I realized that a university, i.e. Nottingham Trent, next to where I was going to live was offering a course in creative writing, and I just sort of started with that and then carried on. I was lucky enough to get to keep going with my writing and my research. So.
Did you, when you started, did you feel like you were Do you think that you were particularly interested in the sort of genres that you work in now when you started, or did you kind of shop around as a writer?
No, I think I was
you as an undergraduate and you were very interested in everything. There was nothing thrown at you that you weren't interested in.
No, I think I have always been interested in everything, and I still am. And I guess that's something that I kind of struggle with, but maybe in a good way. So even with my thesis at the moment, as Sarah knows, I tend to try a little bit of everything. And I tend to have a lot of like little ideas that I go with instead of just sticking to one, you know, larger, smoother thing. So that's always been kind of.
Oh, thank you. That's and thank you. And Lynda, I mean, what do you think particularly? You know, is there anything that you think has particularly helped you through the creative writing study that you've done to be in the position you're in now? Apart from, of course, giving you a PhD, which is very helpful if you want an academic job, right? But
oh yeah, I mean that is very useful. Really getting the level of feedback. So Sarah and Phil Leonard, who's my supervisor, like just the detail of their critique was just so useful, and I just often wish now that I could still have that when I'm writing things, and just their willingness to kind of, because as Victoria said, like I am the same as Victoria, and I dot around and I try lots of things, and but they were so willing to kind of read whatever strange thing I was doing, and it was just so useful to have somebody to have somebody else take, because I said before about me taking my work seriously, but having somebody else take your work that seriously is just really valuable.
Thank you, Lynda, and look, thank you everyone, and sorry for hijacking that with a question, but I just really wanted to know. Thank you so much, wonderful event, and thank you to our attendees, and of course to Sarah for chairing immaculately and putting this together. The Nottingham Creative Writing Hub events are run by my colleagues at NTU. The next one is, well, it's kind of one of my events, but I'm not chairing it. I run a project called Poetry in COVID, and the chair for that event will be my co-leader of that project, Anthony Kaleshu at the University of Plymouth. Reading on that night, that's a week tonight. Reading that night will be 7 poets. Lauren Terry, who's of course a PhD student here, Sinead Morrissey, David Hurd, Shamista Mahanti, Jan Wagner, Rakshan Rizwan, and Carol Leeming. And I think Ian Galbraith will be there as well, who translated Jan Wagner's poems from the German. You are very welcome to attend that, everybody, and there's a link in the chat now. So I'd advise you to sign up for that soon if you want to come, because it's likely to book out. Thank you again for attending. Thank you to our readers. Thank you, Sarah. Take care and good night.
Good night. Thank you.